The morning mist clung to the bay like a shroud, parting slowly as Samuel Garrett worked his nets with the practiced rhythm of 40 years on these waters. His weathered hands moved with surprising gentleness for their size, each motion deliberate and efficient as he hauled in the night's catch. The small wooden boat rocked gently beneath him, its hull worn smooth by countless journeys across the sheltered bay. Samuel's pale blue eyes, the color of winter ice, scanned the horizon with an intensity that seemed at odds with his peaceful occupation. Those eyes had seen more than fish and seabirds, though he kept such memories buried beneath layers of simple routine. His hands told stories he never spoke aloud. Rope burns crisscrossed his palms, old and white against the sun-darkened skin. But it was the peculiar scars along his knuckles and forearms that marked him as something more than a fisherman. Powder burns, precise and geometric, traced patterns that spoke of proximity to cannon fire. The boat itself bore subtle modifications that a casual observer might miss. The hull rode lower in the water than its size suggested, reinforced planking hidden beneath weathered paint. Brass fittings gleamed with a care that exceeded mere vanity, polished to a naval standard that had been drilled into Samuel decades ago. A canvas tarp covered the stern section, secured with knots that belonged on a warship rather than a fishing vessel. Samuel's daily routine had remained unchanged for 15 years. Rise before dawn, check the nets, sail to the deep water where the fish ran thick, and return by noon to sell his catch to the dockside merchants. The townspeople of Haven Bay knew him as a quiet man who kept to himself, paid his debts, and never caused trouble. They respected his privacy and his skill with the nets, but none suspected the weight of history that rode beneath his calm exterior. The water stretched glass smooth in all directions, broken only by the occasional leap of a fish or the wake of his boat. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries the only sound in the morning stillness. This was Samuel's sanctuary, the place where he had found peace after years of thunder and smoke. The bay had welcomed him without questions, offering the solitude he craved and the honest work that kept his hands busy. But on this particular morning, something disturbed the perfect tranquility that Samuel had cultivated so carefully. A smudge of black smoke appeared on the eastern horizon, dark against the pale sky. Samuel's hands stilled on the nets as he watched the smoke grow larger, closer. His eyes narrowed with the automatic assessment of a man who had spent years calculating distance, speed, and threat potential. The smoke moved with purpose, not the random drift of a merchant vessel or fishing boat. Samuel reached beneath the canvas tarp and withdrew a brass spyglass, its surface etched with the seal of the United States Navy. Through the lens, he could make out the outline of a ship moving fast under both sail and steam. No flags flew from her masts, and her dark hull rode low in the water with the predatory grace of a vessel built for speed rather than cargo. The ship's design spoke of modifications, reinforcements, and purposes that had nothing to do with honest commerce. Raiders. Samuel had hoped never to see their kind again in these peaceful waters, but the bay's isolation made it an attractive hunting ground for those who preyed upon honest vessels. The approaching ship carried the unmistakable silhouette of a converted naval vessel, stolen or purchased from some corrupt official and retrofitted for piracy. Her crew would be hardened men who showed no mercy to those they deemed weak or unprepared. Samuel lowered the spyglass and studied his own vessel with fresh eyes. To the raiders, he would appear to be exactly what he seemed, an old fisherman alone in a small boat, far from help and easy prey. They would see gray hair beneath his worn cap, hands that appeared gentle from working nets, and a craft that looked suitable only for coastal fishing. They would not see the reinforced hull, the hidden modifications, or the man who had once served aboard the most feared warship in the American fleet. The raider ship adjusted course, bearing directly towards Samuel's position. There would be no avoiding this encounter, no slipping away to safety before they arrived. Samuel felt the familiar tightness in his chest that preceded action, the same sensation he had known before every naval engagement of his career. His hands moved to secure the nets, but his movements carried a new precision, a military efficiency that had been hidden beneath years of peaceful routine. Samuel Garrett, known to the townspeople as a quiet fisherman, began to prepare for the return of Cannonball Sam. the man who had sent 43 enemy vessels to the bottom of the sea during his 25 years of naval service. The bay might be peaceful, but some storms could not be avoided, only weathered with skill and determination. The raider ship closed the distance with predatory efficiency, her bow cutting through the calm water like a blade. Samuel continued working his nets with deliberate calm, though every fiber of his being tracked the approaching vessel's movement. The ship's crew lined the rail now, 8 men visible with weapons gleaming in the morning sun. Their leader stood at the bow, a massive figure with a black beard and gold teeth that caught the light when he smiled. The raider vessel slowed as it approached, her captain bringing her alongside Samuel's small fishing boat with practiced skill. Heavy ropes sailed through the air, and grappling hooks bit into Samuel's gunwales with metallic clanks that shattered the morning stillness. The fishing boat shuddered under the impact, but the reinforced hull held firm against the assault. Captain Ezra Blackwood was the first to leap across, his boots hitting Samuel's deck with a thud that sent vibrations through the planking. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to block the sun and arms thick as ship's timbers. A curved cutlass hung at his side, and twin pistols jutted from his belt like deadly ornaments. His coat, once the deep blue of a naval officer, had been stained black and decorated with silver buttons torn from victims' clothing. 7 more raiders followed their captain, filling Samuel's small boat with the stench of unwashed bodies and gun oil. They carried an assortment of weapons, muskets, pistols, cutlasses, and boarding axes that had tasted blood on previous raids. Their eyes held the cold calculation of men who had learned to see other human beings as nothing more than cargo to be plundered. Blackwood's gold teeth gleamed as he surveyed Samuel's humble vessel. The old man continued coiling his nets with steady hands, apparently oblivious to the threat surrounding him. This only seemed to amuse the raider captain, who gestured broadly at the catch of fish silvering the boat's bottom. "A fine morning's work, old-timer," Blackwood rumbled, his voice carrying the rasp of a man who had shouted orders over cannon fire. "But I'm thinking you've got more than fish hidden away on this little tub of yours. Word is that fishermen in these parts have been doing well for themselves, pulling gold and silver from secret hiding places." Samuel looked up from his nets, his pale blue eyes meeting Blackwood's dark stare without flinching. The measurement was brief but complete, 30 years of naval experience cataloging threats, weapons, and tactical positions in a single glance. "I'm just a fisherman, Captain. Got nothing but what you see here." The raiders laughed at this, a harsh sound that sent seabirds wheeling away from the confrontation. Blackwood's expression darkened as he stepped closer, his massive frame casting Samuel in shadow. "Don't play innocent with me, old man. We've been watching these waters for weeks. Fishermen don't retire comfortable without stashing coins somewhere safe. And you've got the look of a man who's been saving for his golden years." Samuel's hands never stopped moving, securing lines and arranging tackle with the methodical precision that had marked his entire adult life. "You boys should move along now. These waters aren't as safe as they seem, and you might find more trouble than you bargained for." The warning carried no heat, no bluster, just the quiet certainty of a man stating simple fact. But Blackwood heard only the tremor of an old man's fear, and his grin widened to show more gold teeth. "Trouble, he says," the captain called to his men. "Did you hear that, lads? The old salt thinks he can frighten us with talk of trouble." The raiders erupted in laughter again, slapping their thighs and elbowing each other with delight. One of them, a scarred man with a patch over his left eye, grabbed a section of Samuel's net and examined it with exaggerated interest. "Fine work, grandfather. Must have taken you years to learn knots this fancy. Maybe we'll keep you alive long enough to teach us a thing or two about fishing." Samuel's movements stilled for just a moment, his pale eyes focusing on the man handling his nets. "I'd let go of those lines if I were you, son. Some knots are more dangerous than they appear. But before you find out what happens next, I need you to do something for me. If you're enjoying this tale of hidden legends and unexpected justice, hit that like button right now. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, make sure you do that too. Comment below and tell me what country you're listening from. I love seeing how these stories of courage and justice travel around the world. Now stay with me until the end, because what's about to unfold will remind you that some men should never be underestimated. The scarred raider yanked hard on the net, sending fish scattering across the deck. But as he pulled, something in Samuel's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. The old fisherman's back straightened by degrees, his shoulders squaring in a way that spoke of parade grounds and military bearing. The gentle curve of age seemed to melt away, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. Blackwood noticed the change and felt the first whisper of unease crawl up his spine. The old man's hands had stopped their constant motion, settling instead into a stillness that reminded the captain of the moment before a storm struck. Samuel's pale blue eyes had taken on a different quality, no longer the mild gaze of a simple fisherman, but something colder and more calculating. "That's enough," Samuel said quietly, and somehow his voice carried across the boat despite its low volume. Every raider heard him clearly, and something in that tone made several of them shift nervously. The quality of the old man's stillness had changed, becoming the poised readiness of a predator rather than the frozen fear of prey. Blackwood's hand drifted toward his cutlass, instinct warning him that the dynamics of this encounter had shifted in ways he didn't fully understand. The morning sun seemed less warm suddenly, and the gentle rocking of the boats felt more like the uneasy sway before a battle. Samuel Garrett stood in the center of his small fishing boat, surrounded by 8 armed men, and somehow it was the raiders who were beginning to feel outnumbered. The youngest member of Blackwood's crew, a lanky boy named Tommy who couldn't have seen more than 20 summers, found himself staring at Samuel's hands with growing unease. Something about those weathered digits nagged at his memory, tugging at knowledge he'd gained during his brief stint aboard a legitimate merchant vessel before turning to piracy. Tommy had worked the gun deck of a trading ship for 6 months, long enough to learn the distinctive marks that cannon work left on a man's body. He'd seen how the flash and heat of black powder etched permanent reminders into flesh, creating scars that followed predictable patterns based on a gunner's position and experience. Samuel's hands bore those exact markings. The geometric precision of powder burns traced along his knuckles and forearms, too regular and too specific to be accidents. These were the scars of a man who had stood beside great guns, who had touched hot metal and breathed smoke for years at a time. Tommy's eyes widened as he counted the overlapping burn patterns, each one representing countless hours of artillery work. "Those aren't fishing scars," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible over the gentle lapping of water against the boat hulls. "Captain, look at his hands. Those are gunpowder burns from big guns. Naval guns." Blackwood's attention snapped to Samuel's hands, and the raider captain felt his confidence waver for the first time since boarding the fishing vessel. He'd raided enough ships to recognize the signs of military service, but he'd been focused on the old man's apparent frailty rather than the details that might reveal his true nature. Samuel noticed the scrutiny and slowly raised his hands, turning them palm up in a gesture that seemed casual but revealed the full extent of his scars. The morning light caught every mark, every trace of a career spent in service to artillery that could punch holes through enemy hulls at tremendous distances. 40 years I served on the gun deck," Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying a different cadence now, the measured tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Started as a powder monkey when I was younger than your boy there. Worked my way up to gun captain, then master gunner. USS Constitution, USS United States, USS Constellation. Made a career of putting iron through enemy hulls." The transformation that had begun in the previous moments accelerated now, revealing itself fully as Samuel allowed his true bearing to emerge. The stooped posture of an aging fisherman melted away, replaced by the rigid spine of a naval officer. His shoulders squared with parade ground precision, and his pale blue eyes took on the cold clarity of a man who had seen battle and survived. Tommy's face went white as understanding crashed over him like a rogue wave. He'd heard stories in every port from Halifax to Charleston, whispered tales of naval gunners whose skill bordered on the supernatural. One name stood out among all the rest, spoken with equal measures of respect and fear by sailors who had witnessed the man's deadly precision. "Jesus and Mary," Tommy breathed, his voice cracking with terror. "You're him. You're Cannonball Sam." The name hit Blackwood's crew like a physical blow. Every man among them had heard the stories, the legends that grew larger with each telling in dockside taverns and ship's quarters. Cannonball Sam, the master gunner who could put a ball through a portholes at 800 yards. The man who had single-handedly dismasted 3 British frigates during one legendary engagement off the Carolina coast. Samuel Garrett nodded slowly, acknowledging the recognition with the calm dignity of a man who had long since come to terms with his reputation. That's what they called me, yes. 25 years of active service, 43 enemy vessels sent to the bottom. I earned my retirement, and I earned my peace. Blackwood's hand tightened on his cutlass hilt, but uncertainty now clouded his features. He'd built his career on preying upon the weak and unprepared, but this old fisherman represented something entirely different. The stories painted Cannonball Sam as a man who had never lost an engagement, who had turned the tide of battles with his uncanny accuracy and tactical genius. But those days are behind me, Samuel continued, his voice still carrying that quiet authority that made grown men listen despite themselves. I came to these waters seeking peace, not war. I suggest you boys climb back aboard your ship and sail away. Find easier prey, merchants who won't fight back. Leave an old man to his nets and his solitude. The offer hung in the salt air like smoke from a cannon's mouth, weighted with possibility and pregnant with consequences. Tommy was already backing toward the rail, his young face pale with the knowledge of who they had cornered. But Blackwood's pride wrestled with his survival instinct, and pride had always been his weakness. Stories, the captain growled, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Tales told by drunk sailors in waterfront dives. You're just an old man with scars and delusions of glory. Age has made you forget that legends die just like anyone else when they bleed. Samuel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the quality of his stillness. The gentle fisherman was gone entirely now, replaced by the naval warrior who had earned his fearsome reputation through skill, courage, and the absolute certainty that came from surviving more battles than most men could count. Tommy saw the change and made a desperate grab for the rail of Blackwood's ship, trying to escape what was coming. But the other raiders, caught up in their captain's bravado, and perhaps hoping that age had indeed dulled the legend's edge, moved closer to Samuel with weapons ready. The old gunner stood in the center of his fishing boat, surrounded by 8 armed pirates, and smiled with the cold satisfaction of a man who had been in this exact situation more times than he cared to remember. The bay around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm that was about to break over those peaceful waters. Samuel's smile held no warmth as he reached beneath the canvas tarp that had concealed the stern section of his boat. His movements carried the fluid precision of 40 years of military drill, each motion economical and purposeful. The raiders tensed, expecting him to produce some pathetic fishing knife or perhaps beg for mercy. What emerged from beneath that weathered canvas shattered their assumptions like cannonballs through paper. The tarp fell away to reveal a gleaming brass swivel cannon, its bore polished to mirror brightness, and its mounting mechanism crafted with the precision that marked genuine naval ordnance. The weapon sat on a rotating base that allowed it to traverse the entire arc around Samuel's boat, and its brass nameplate bore the inscription United States Navy followed by a serial number that spoke of official provenance. But the cannon was only the beginning of Samuel's revelations. Hidden panels along the boat's sides dropped down to reveal racks of loaded muskets, their barrels gleaming with oil and ready for immediate use. Compartments that had appeared to hold fishing tackle instead contained kegs of black powder, bags of shot, and the tools of naval warfare maintained in perfect condition despite their owner's supposed retirement. Blackwood's eyes widened as he took in the full extent of the fishing boat's hidden arsenal. The vessel he had dismissed as easy prey was in fact a floating fortress, equipped with enough firepower to take on a ship twice its size. The reinforced hull suddenly made sense, as did the brass fittings that he had mistaken for a fisherman's vanity. Samuel's hands moved with mechanical precision as he prepared the swivel cannon for action. His movements followed the ritual drilled into him during decades of naval service. Check the powder charge, inspect the shot, verify the firing mechanism. Every motion flowed into the next with the smooth efficiency of a man who had performed these tasks under fire in conditions far more desperate than the current situation. The first rule of naval gunnery: Samuel said conversationally as he worked, his voice carrying the tone of a patient instructor, is to never allow the enemy to dictate the terms of engagement. Control the distance, control the angle, and you control the outcome. Two of Blackwood's men made a desperate leap toward their own ship, recognizing that the balance of power had shifted decisively against them. Samuel's response was instantaneous and devastating. The swivel cannon spoke with a voice like thunder, its muzzle flash illuminating the morning air in stark relief. The carefully measured charge sent a load of grapeshot across the narrow gap between vessels with surgical precision. The fleeing raiders never reached their ship. The grapeshot caught them in mid-leap, sending their bodies tumbling into the water with the boneless finality of marionettes whose strings had been cut. The bay around the two vessels turned red as their blood mixed with the salt water, creating spreading stains that would attract sharks before the morning was done. Samuel was already reloading with the mechanical efficiency that had made him legendary among his naval peers. His hands moved without conscious thought, following patterns burned into muscle memory through countless drills and actual combat. Powder, wadding, shot, ram home, prime the pan. The entire sequence took less than 30 seconds, a speed that would have impressed gun crews half his age. The remaining raiders stood frozen in shock, their weapons suddenly feeling inadequate in their hands. Blackwood's cutlass and pistols seemed like toys compared to the naval artillery now trained upon them. The captain's face had gone pale beneath his weather-beaten tan, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Naval tactics are all about geometry. Samuel continued in that same conversational tone as he swung the cannon to cover the remaining raiders. Angle of attack, range calculation, rate of fire. You boys never learned those lessons, which is why you're about to receive a practical demonstration. 3 more raiders attempted to rush Samuel simultaneously, hoping to overwhelm him before he could bring the cannon to bear again. But Samuel had anticipated this move, having seen it attempted countless times during his naval career. His response revealed the depth of his tactical thinking and the extent of his preparations. Hidden springs released catches along the boat's sides, and suddenly Samuel's fishing vessel bristled with loaded muskets held in spring-loaded brackets. His hands moved in a blur, snatching weapons and firing them in rapid succession with the practiced accuracy that had made him a legend. Each shot found its mark with devastating precision, sending raiders tumbling into the blood-stained water. The musket work revealed another aspect of Samuel's military training. These weren't the wild shots of a desperate man, but the calculated fire of someone who had spent years learning to kill efficiently under pressure. His stance remained rock-steady despite the boat's motion, and his breathing never altered from its calm, measured rhythm. Blackwood watched his crew disappear with growing horror, realizing that he had led his men into a trap disguised as easy prey. The old fisherman he had planned to rob was systematically dismantling his raiding party with the cold professionalism of a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of naval warfare. "This is impossible," Blackwood gasped, his voice cracking with disbelief. "You're just one old man. One man can't fight 8 armed raiders and win." Samuel paused in his reloading to fix Blackwood with those pale blue eyes that had seen more battle than the raider captain could imagine. "One man can," he corrected quietly, "when that man has spent 25 years learning his trade aboard the finest warships ever built. When he's faced British frigates, French corvettes, and Barbary pirates. When he stood on deck while enemy shot whistled overhead, and learned to think clearly while other men screamed and died." The swivel cannon swung toward Blackwood with mechanical precision, its brass muzzle seeming to grow larger as it centered on the raider captain's chest. Samuel's finger rested lightly on the firing mechanism, and his expression held the calm certainty of a man who had made this calculation hundreds of times before. 3 of your men remain," Samuel observed, his tactical assessment delivered with the detachment of a professional evaluating a routine problem. "Yourself, the boy who recognized my scars, and the scarred fellow with the eye patch. The boy has sense enough to know when he's beaten. The question is whether you and your friend possess similar wisdom." The morning sun climbed higher as Samuel waited for their decision, his weapon trained and ready, his breathing steady and controlled. The bay around them had fallen silent except for the gentle lapping of waves against blood-stained hulls and the distant cries of seabirds. The peaceful fishing grounds had become a battlefield, and Cannonball Sam was preparing to finish what the raiders had so foolishly started. Blackwood's decision came with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. Rather than surrender, the raider captain threw himself toward his ship's rail while screaming orders to his remaining crew members aboard the larger vessel. "Return fire, you dogs. Bring the ship's guns to bear. Kill that old devil before he murders us all." But Samuel had anticipated this move as well, his tactical mind already 3 steps ahead of his opponents. Even as Blackwood scrambled for safety, the legendary gunner was adjusting his cannon's elevation and calculating the precise angle needed to cripple the raider ship. His pale blue eyes tracked the enemy vessel's weak points with the practiced assessment of a man who had dismasted 43 ships during his naval career. The swivel cannon roared again, its carefully aimed shot striking the raider ship's mainmast at exactly the point where Samuel's experience told him the wood would be under maximum stress. The impact sent splinters flying like deadly arrows, and the massive timber shuddered before beginning its inexorable fall toward the deck below. Blackwood's men scrambled like ants as their mainmast crashed down in a tangle of rope, canvas, and shattered wood. The falling timber crushed 2 pirates who had been attempting to bring their own cannon to bear, and the ship's mobility was instantly compromised. Without her mainsail, the vessel could neither flee nor maneuver effectively, leaving her crew trapped within range of Samuel's devastating accuracy. The old gunner was already reloading with machine-like precision, his movements flowing through the familiar sequence of naval gunnery. But this time he selected a different type of ammunition from his hidden stores, a specialized round that spoke to both his tactical genius and his intimate knowledge of ship construction. Chain shot, designed specifically to destroy rigging and render enemy vessels helpless. Samuel's second shot screamed through the morning air with a sound like tearing silk, the linked cannonballs spinning end over end as they sought their target. The chain shot struck the raider ship's foremast with devastating effect, the rotating iron shearing through wood and rope with surgical precision. The foremast toppled backward, creating a second tangle of debris that further reduced the ship's ability to function. Blackwood's vessel now listed heavily to starboard, her deck cluttered with fallen timber and her crew in complete disarray. Water had begun entering through holes punched in her hull by falling masts, and the ship was taking on weight that would eventually drag her beneath the bay's surface. The raider captain found himself trapped aboard a sinking vessel, facing an opponent whose skill exceeded his worst nightmares. But Blackwood possessed the stubborn courage of a man who had built his reputation through violence and intimidation. Rather than accept defeat, he gathered his remaining men and prepared for a final desperate gambit. If his ship was doomed, he would at least attempt to take the legendary gunner down with him. "Prepare for boarding action," Blackwood roared to his surviving crew members. "We'll swarm the old devil and cut him down with steel if we can't match him with guns. Ready your cutlasses and follow me across." Samuel watched the preparations with the calm interest of a professional studying an opponent's tactics. He had faced boarding parties before, during his years of active service, and he understood both their strengths and their weaknesses. The raiders would attempt to overwhelm him through sheer numbers and close-quarters ferocity, hoping to negate his advantages in artillery and seamanship. The fishing boat's hidden arsenal provided answers to this threat as well. Samuel reached beneath his feet and activated another concealed mechanism, causing a section of the deck to slide away and reveal a sword rack holding naval cutlasses of the finest quality. He selected a weapon whose blade gleamed with the blue steel sheen of perfectly maintained metal, its edge honed to razor sharpness through years of careful attention. The cutlass felt familiar in Samuel's weathered hand, its weight and balance as natural as breathing after decades of practice and combat. He had learned swordwork aboard ships where skill with a blade could mean the difference between life and death, and his instructors had been veterans of the Barbary Wars who understood that naval combat often came down to steel meeting steel on blood-slicked decks. Blackwood led the charge himself, leaping across the gap between vessels with his own cutlass raised high and a roar of fury echoing from his throat. Behind him came 4 of his remaining crew members, desperate men who understood that their only chance of survival lay in overwhelming their opponent before he could reload his cannon or select another weapon from his extensive arsenal. Samuel's response demonstrated the surgical precision that had made him legendary among naval warriors. His movements flowed with the economy of motion that marked a true master, each cut and thrust calculated to achieve maximum effect with minimum effort. The first raider to reach him fell with a blade through his heart, Samuel's cutlass sliding between ribs with the accuracy of a surgeon's scalpel. The second attacker managed to engage Samuel's blade directly, metal ringing against metal in the traditional duel of naval combat. But the raider's technique, learned through tavern brawls and desperate skirmishes, proved no match for Samuel's formal training and decades of experience. The old gunner disarmed his opponent with a classic bind and riposte, sending the man's weapon spinning into the water before delivering a finishing thrust. Blackwood himself proved more formidable than his crew members, his size and strength presenting a genuine challenge even to Samuel's superior skill. The raider captain's cutlass work showed evidence of real training, and his tactical sense was sharp enough to recognize and exploit openings in his opponent's guard. For several minutes, the two men fought with deadly intensity, their blades weaving patterns of steel against the morning sky. But age and treachery proved no match for skill and experience. Samuel had learned his sword work from men who had faced the finest blade masters in the world, and his technique had been refined through combat against opponents far more dangerous than pirates and raiders. Gradually, he gained the advantage, his superior footwork and tactical awareness allowing him to control the distance and timing of their engagement. The end came with shocking suddenness. Samuel feinted high, drawing Blackwood's guard upward, then delivered a low thrust that slipped beneath the raider captain's defense and found the gap between his ribs. Blackwood's eyes widened with shock and pain as cold steel pierced his heart, and he collapsed to the fishing boat's deck with blood spreading beneath his massive frame. The raider ship continued its death spiral, taking on water through multiple breaches and settling deeper into the bay with each passing minute. Samuel watched her go down with the professional satisfaction of a job well done, counting her as the 44th enemy vessel he had sent to the bottom during his long career. The morning sun glinted off the waves that closed over her hull, erasing another threat from these peaceful waters. As the ship disappeared beneath the surface, Samuel noticed something that filled him with grim satisfaction. Other shapes rested on the seafloor below, the broken remains of fishing boats and merchant vessels that had fallen prey to Blackwood's crew over the months and years of their predatory existence. Justice had finally come to these waters, delivered by the steady hand of a naval veteran who understood the true cost of allowing evil men to prey upon the innocent. The bay fell silent once more, its surface unmarked except for a few floating pieces of debris that would soon sink or drift away on the tide. Samuel began the methodical process of cleaning his weapons and concealing his arsenal beneath its canvas coverings, returning his boat to its innocent appearance as a simple fishing vessel. The transformation was complete within minutes, leaving no evidence of the morning's violence except for the peace that would now return to these waters. 3 hours after the raider ship disappeared beneath the waves, Samuel Garrett resumed his fishing as if nothing extraordinary had occurred in the peaceful waters of Haven Bay. His nets moved through the water with the same gentle rhythm that had marked his mornings for 15 years, and his weathered face showed no trace of the violence that had stained these waters red with blood. The transformation back to humble fisherman was as complete as his earlier metamorphosis into naval warrior had been. His military bearing melted away, replaced by the stooped posture and careful movements of an aging man who earned his living from the sea. The canvas tarp once again concealed his hidden arsenal, and the brass fittings that had gleamed like naval ordnance now appeared to be nothing more than a fisherman's pride in his humble craft. By noon, other fishing boats had begun to appear on the horizon, their crews drawn by the calm conditions and the promise of good catches in the bay's deeper waters. Samuel watched them approach with satisfaction, knowing that they sailed in safety for the first time in months. Word would spread quickly through the fishing community that the raiders who had terrorized these waters were gone, and the bay would once again become the peaceful haven it had been before Blackwood's arrival. The first boat to approach Samuel belonged to Henrik Larsson, a Norwegian immigrant who had been fishing these waters almost as long as Samuel himself. Henrik's weathered face bore the same marks of wind and salt that characterized all the bay's fishermen, and his steady blue eyes missed little of what occurred in his domain. "Good morning, Samuel," Henrik called across the water as his boat drew alongside. "Peaceful day for fishing, is it not? Though I could have sworn I heard thunder earlier, despite the clear skies." Samuel's pale eyes met Henrik's steady gaze, and a moment of understanding passed between the two veteran fishermen. "Just the morning catch, Henrik. Nothing more than that. The fish are running well today, and the water is clear all the way to the bottom." Henrik nodded slowly, his experienced eye taking in details that would have escaped a casual observer. The absence of seabirds diving for scraps, the faint smell of gunpowder that still lingered on the morning breeze, the way Samuel's boat sat slightly lower in the water despite the modest catch visible in her bottom. "Good to know," Henrik replied carefully. "Good to know the waters are clear again." As the day progressed, more fishing boats arrived to work the bay's productive waters. Samuel noticed how their crews moved with greater confidence than they had shown in recent months, no longer constantly scanning the horizon for signs of predatory sails. Children accompanied their fathers on boats that had previously sailed with armed guards, and the laughter of families enjoying peaceful waters carried across the bay like music. Young Peter Kowalski, barely 16 and eager to prove himself worthy of his father's fishing boat, approached Samuel's vessel in mid-afternoon with the curiosity that marked his generation. The boy had heard whispers among the dock workers about strange sounds from the bay that morning, and his eyes held the bright intelligence of someone piecing together a puzzle. "Mr. Garrett," Peter called out with the directness of youth, "my father says you've been fishing these waters longer than anyone. Have you noticed that we haven't seen those raiders lately? The ones who were troubling honest fishermen?" Samuel looked up from his nets with the mild expression that had served him well during 15 years of anonymity. "Can't say I've noticed much of anything, son. Old men like me, we keep our eyes on our nets and let younger folks worry about the larger world. Besides, raiders come and go like weather patterns. Maybe they just found easier hunting grounds elsewhere." Peter's sharp eyes studied Samuel's boat with the keen observation that would serve him well in his chosen profession. But something in the old fisherman's calm demeanor seemed to satisfy the boy's curiosity without encouraging further questions. The young man nodded respectfully and returned to his own fishing, carrying with him the sense that Haven Bay had somehow become safer without anyone quite understanding how or why. As evening approached and the fishing boats began their return to port, Samuel allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He reached beneath the canvas tarp and withdrew a small wooden chest that had been hidden among his naval arsenal, its brass corners green with age and its lid secured with a lock that bore the seal of the United States Navy. Inside the chest lay the accumulated honors of 25 years of distinguished service, commendations from commodores who had witnessed his skill under fire, medals awarded for actions that had helped secure American victories in forgotten engagements, and letters of appreciation from crews whose lives had been saved by his tactical genius. But the item Samuel treasured most was a simple piece of paper, yellowed with age and worn soft at the edges from handling. The document was his discharge papers, signed by a Secretary of the Navy who had recognized Samuel's contributions to his country's maritime security. But more importantly, it was his passport to the peaceful retirement he had earned through decades of service in harm's way. The paper represented his freedom to choose when and how to use the deadly skills that had made him legendary, rather than being compelled to employ them at the command of others. Samuel studied the document in the fading light, remembering the young man who had first enlisted with dreams of adventure and glory. That boy had learned harsh lessons about the true cost of violence and the weight of responsibility that came with superior skill. The older man who had emerged from those experiences understood that true victory lay not in dominating one's enemies, but in creating conditions where violence became unnecessary. Yet today's events had reminded Samuel that evil men would always seek to prey upon the innocent, and that sometimes peaceful solutions proved inadequate to protect those who could not protect themselves. His duty to safeguard these waters had not ended with his retirement from active service, but had simply taken on a different character, becoming a personal mission rather than a military obligation. The bay stretched before Samuel in the gathering dusk, its surface painted gold by the setting sun and disturbed only by the gentle wakes of fishing boats returning home with their catches. This was his domain now, these waters and the honest people who earned their living from the sea's bounty. He had found his peace here, but he would guard that peace with the same skill and determination that had once served his country. Samuel secured his treasures beneath the canvas once more and turned his boat toward home, satisfied with the day's work. The fishing had been good, the water was clear, and the bay was safe for those who deserved its protection. Tomorrow would bring another peaceful morning, another day of nets and fish and quiet contentment. If you found meaning in Samuel's story of duty that extends beyond formal service, I hope you'll take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share stories of unsung heroes every week, men and women whose quiet courage makes the world safer for those they protect. Comment below and tell us about an unsung hero in your own community, someone whose dedication makes a difference even when no one else notices. Until next time, may you find the courage to stand guard over what matters most, and the wisdom to know when action serves a higher purpose than peace.